We believe our history is a straight line. An arrow of progress, shot from a primitive and superstitious past, flying faithfully toward our bright, technological present. We are a civilization of answers. We have mapped the human genome, split the atom, sent telescopes to the edge of time, and unraveled the very fabric of the cosmos. We are the masters of information, capable of storing the sum of human knowledge in the palm of our hand. The arrogance of this era is that there are no more mysteries, only problems yet to be solved. We live under the illusion that the light of reason has already swept away all the dark corners of the past. This is the story we tell ourselves, a tale of uninterrupted triumph of mind over matter. But there is a ghost that haunts this story. A persistent shadow that refuses to be exorcised by our science. A specter, sitting in the sand of Giza, Egypt, watching the ebb and flow of millennia with eyes of stone. It is, perhaps, the most recognizable, most enigmatic, and most photographed object on Earth. An image seared into the collective consciousness of humanity. We have all seen it, in books, films, and on coins. But, for all our cutting-edge technology, all our lasers and radars, we have never truly understood it. The Great Sphinx. It is a colossus that defies human scale. A monster 73 meters, 240 feet, long and 20 meters, 66 feet, high, as wide as a city block. It was not built. It was revealed, carved not from transported blocks, but extracted directly from the living bedrock of the Giza Plateau, a single, monolithic mass of stone. It is a lion's body, the personification of wild, solar strength, with the head of a human king, the personification of intelligence and dominion. It crouches in its own massive quarry, a moat that isolates it from the world, a silent and imposing guardian, whose posture suggests eternal vigilance. The desert sand, in an endless cycle, tries to swallow it, but it always re-emerges, more mysterious with each revelation. For 200 years, the line of history has been drawn with the precision of a Victorian architect, neat and organized. The orthodox story, the one that is the foundation of all academic Egyptology and fills every page of every textbook, is simple and reassuring. The Sphinx was carved in 2500 BC, during the height of the 4th dynasty, by the Pharaoh Khafre. Its face, though mutilated by time and, perhaps, Mamluk canons, is unmistakably his face. It is a dynastic portrait, an act of filial piety and royal power, serving as an eternal guardian for his pyramid, the second Great Pyramid, which rises majestically directly behind it. The academic consensus is that the mystery is a modern invention. The case, we are told with authority, is closed. But this story, this clean, organized, and conveniently complete explanation, is a lie. It is not an intentional lie, perhaps, but a lie by omission. A lie of academic convenience, which prefers the certainty of established dogma to the vertigo of an impossible truth, because the Sphinx itself, in its stony silence, tells a radically different story. It is a narrative so profound, so fundamentally impossible for our accepted chronology, that to accept it would mean that the foundation of everything we think we know about the origin of human civilization is irredeemably wrong. The Sphinx is not merely 4,500 years old. Its story is not a mere biographical footnote about the Pharaoh Khafre. It is more than a statue. It is a machine. It is a cosmic clock, calibrated for ages. A time marker, left by a civilization that, according to our history books, should not exist. A civilization that possessed an astronomical and geological knowledge that we are only now beginning to rediscover. And it is a tomb. Not the sarcophagus of a man, nor a king, but the repository of a message. A crucial message, hidden in a forbidden chamber, a legendary hall of records, whose existence the authorities have been actively, and desperately, trying to suppress and deny for decades, using the weight of bureaucracy and dogma to keep the secret buried. This is the true mystery of the Great Sphinx. The riddle is not the trivial, what walks on 4 legs, 2, and 3. The riddle is much deeper, who built it, in what unimaginable era, and what, of such vital importance to humanity, is it hiding beneath the sand and stone. To understand the heresy that threatens to topple the temple of Egyptology, we must first dive into the solidity of orthodoxy. The official story is powerful because it is built on an architectural and dynastic logic that seems unassailable. We are in 2500 BC. This is the apex of the Fourth Dynasty, the Age of Giants, a period of centralized power and limitless resources. This is the time of the Pharaoh Khufu, Cheops, the builder of the Great Pyramid, a marvel of mathematical precision, and his son, Khafre, and his son, Menkaure. In an incredibly short period, perhaps less than 100 years, these three god-kings, with monumental ambition, built the most massive, precise, and enduring monuments on Earth. The scale of the Giza project is a testament to the organizational capacity and absolute belief in the divine power of the pharaoh. The orthodox theory posits that the Giza Plateau is a cohesive urban and architectural planning project, conceived and executed in its entirety by the Fourth Dynasty. When Khufu built his Great Pyramid, his workers extracted millions of tons of limestone from a massive, U-shaped quarry that surrounds the site. At the end of the quarrying, this pit was left, and in the middle of it, untouched, was a single, massive, low-lying outcrop of rock. Egyptian geologists call it bad rock, a lower-quality limestone, full of soft, brittle layers, unsuitable for being cut into building blocks for the pyramid. Khafre, Khufu's successor, came to build his own second pyramid. He saw this bad rock, this geological obstacle, and had a stroke of genius that transformed a problem into a symbol. He would not order it removed and discarded. He would order it to be transformed. He had his workers, masters of large-scale sculpture, carve this entire hill of native rock, this yardang, into the body of a reclining lion. The lion was an ancient symbol of royal and solar power, and on its top, where the rock was of better quality, they would carve the head of a king. His head. A divine portrait, a fusion of man and God, guarding his own pyramid, looking toward the sunrise, for all eternity. The Sphinx, in this context, is the icing on the cake, the final touch of a perfectly planned funerary complex. The evidence for this official narrative, when presented in isolation, is strong and compelling. First, the question of identity, the face. For over a century, Egyptologists like Selim Hassan and Mark Lenner have claimed that the face of the Sphinx, despite the erosion and damage, bears an unmistakable resemblance, a perfect match, to the other confirmed black diorite statues of Khafre, statues that were found intact in his valley temple. It is an argument of dynastic iconography. Second, the location and architectural context. The Sphinx is not isolated in the desert. It fits perfectly into Khafre's plan. It sits precisely next to the massive stone causeway that connects Khafre's valley temple, which was on the ancient bank of the Nile, where the barges arrived, to his mortuary temple, located at the base of his pyramid. It is an integral piece, a dramatic focal point, of his architectural complex, proof that it was conceived to serve him. Third, the geology of the construction. The better quality limestone from which the Sphinx's head is carved, and the casing blocks that cover the body, were quarried from the exact same geological layer as the limestone used to build Khafre's own temples. This suggests a contemporaneity in the quarrying and use of the material. The case does, indeed, seem closed. It is a colossal portrait of Khafre. It is 4,500 years old. It is the story we all learn, but this is where the ghost story begins to whisper. It is at this point of absolute certainty that the clean, organized theory begins to unravel under the weight of simple, but devastating, observations. We must begin with the most obvious observation, the one that any child can make. The head. Look at it, not as an icon, but as a sculpture. The Sphinx's head is laughably small. It is impossibly, comically, disproportionate to the 73-meter long, 240-foot, and 20-meter high, 66-foot, leonine body. The head looks shrunken, a glaring anomaly that disrupts the visual harmony of the entire work. Why? Why would the Fourth Dynasty Egyptians, the masters of proportion and engineering, the men who built the Great Pyramid, a 146-meter high, 481-foot, jewel box, whose precision is perfect to fractions of an inch, a feat we can barely replicate today. Why would they make such a simple, amateurish, beginner's mistake in the proportion of their most visible work? It's a mistake a first-year art student wouldn't make. They wouldn't. This is the first heretical clue, the crack in the dogma. This is the clue, first championed by the symbolist scholar John Anthony West, that suggests a radical, yet elegant, idea. The head we see today is not the original head. The head is a recarving. The original statue, the monolithic masterpiece that emerged from the bedrock, was something else. Perhaps a complete lion, with a proportionally massive lion's head, or perhaps a jackal, a representation of Anubis, the god of the dead, which would fit perfectly into the funerary context. And that original statue was immensely ancient. And then, thousands of years later, a pharaoh, perhaps Khafre, or one of his predecessors, came along. He found this colossal statue, already worn by time and erosion, and, in an act of appropriation and vanity, ordered the ancient, battered lion head to be recarved into his own face. It is a brilliant theory because it solves the problem of disproportion with irrefutable logic. A recarving can only be smaller than the original. To transform a massive lion's head into a human head, the sculptor would have to drastically reduce the size, resulting in the small, awkward head we see today. But this theory, however elegant, requires a time machine. To prove it, you must prove that the body, the part that was not recarved, is thousands of years older than the head and, crucially, thousands of years older than the official date of 2500 BC. You would need a smoking gun, a piece of scientific evidence that could withstand the attack of the academic establishment. In 1990, John Anthony West found that proof. He didn't discover it in the field, but he found it in an obscure article by a geologist, and this discovery, when brought to light, would ignite the largest and most bitter controversy in the history of modern archaeology. The clue, the smoking gun, is water. West was not a geologist. He was a philosopher, a symbolist, a man who saw patterns and hidden meanings. He looked at the Sphinx and saw a visual anomaly. The erosion on the body of the Sphinx and on the walls of the enclosure that surrounds it looked fundamentally different from the erosion on all the other monuments at Giza. It did not look like the erosion on the pyramids, nor on the 4th dynasty tombs. The pyramids, and all the other tombs on the plateau, show what is expected in a desert: wind erosion. It is a horizontal process. The wind, loaded with fine sand, acts like a natural sand blaster, wearing away the softer rock in horizontal bands, leaving the harder rock protruding. The result is a sharp, angular, horizontal pattern. But the body of the Sphinx, and, crucially, the 9-meter-high, 30-foot, limestone walls of the ditch it sits in, show something completely different. They show water erosion. They exhibit deep, vertical, undulating, and rounded grooves, which resemble waves of water cascading down. This is not the work of wind. This is the classic, unmistakable signature of precipitation-induced weathering. This is the work of thousands of years of heavy, torrential rain, which lashed the stone, ran down the enclosure walls, and pooled at the bottom. John Anthony West had his theory, but he needed scientific validation. He needed an expert who could attest to the rock. Ignoring the history, he approached geologist after geologist. The answer was always the same: refusal. They didn't want to get involved. The subject was Egyptology, a minefield of dogma. It was, in their words, career suicide to question the Khafre chronology, until he found Dr. Robert Schoch. Schoch was not a mystic, nor a fringe theorist. He was a tenured, respected, Yale-educated professor of geology from Boston University. He was a man of pure rock science, an expert in weathering and stratigraphy. He was the epitome of scientific orthodoxy. West took Schoch to Giza. He was deliberately vague. He didn't tell him his theories about Atlantis or recarving. He just took him to the Sphinx enclosure, pointed to the 9-meter-high wall, and asked a simple question, devoid of historical context. Doctor, as a geologist, what caused this erosion pattern? Schoch took one look. He didn't care about pharaohs or dates. He was a scientist. He read the rock with the objectivity of one reading a book, and he said, without hesitation, "This is not wind erosion. This is water. This is classic, textbook, precipitation-induced weathering. It's the result of heavy, prolonged rain." He had no idea of the weight his words carried. West then took him to the 4th dynasty tombs, just a few hundred meters away, carved from the exact same limestone, but which had never been at the bottom of a ditch. Shock looked at them. "This," he said, "is wind erosion. Horizontal. Classic. What you expect in the desert." "So," West asked, his voice calm, "the erosion in the Sphinx enclosure is fundamentally different from the erosion on the tombs?" "Yes," Shock said. "Completely different. They cannot have occurred under the same climatic conditions." And then, West set the final trap, the one that would force the geologist to confront history. "But Dr. Egyptologists tell us that the Sphinx and these tombs were all built at the same time. 2500 BC. Shock was perplexed. It was a geological contradiction. A scientific impossibility. The two sites, made of the same rock, could not be the same age under the same climatic history. The geology, the cold, hard evidence of the rock, proved the chronology was wrong, and this is the bombshell that exploded in the heart of Egyptology. Shock, the scientist, had to ask the question that no one else dared. When was the last time it rained in Giza with the necessary intensity? Not an occasional drizzle, which barely wets the sand, but heavy, sustained, torrential rain, for thousands of years, enough to dissolve and carve meters of solid limestone, creating those deep vertical grooves. He looked up the paleoclimatologists. The data was unequivocal. The Sahara Desert, in 2500 BC, was, as it is today, a desert. It was just as arid. The climatic conditions of the 4th dynasty could not have produced the erosion pattern on the Sphinx. You have to go back. You have to go way back. Before the dynastic Egyptians. Before the first pharaoh, Narmer, who unified Egypt. Before the first hieroglyphs. You have to go back to the last ice age and the period immediately following it. Before 10,000 BC, the climate was chaotic. But after the peak of the ice age, from 9000 BC to 5000 BC, a phenomenon known as the Green Sahara, or the African humid period, occurred. The tropical monsoons had shifted north. Giza, in this period, was not a barren desert. It was a lush savanna. It was grassland, dotted with lakes and rivers, with heavy, reliable annual rainfall. And Shock's conclusion, based purely on rock science, was inevitable and revolutionary. The erosion on the Sphinx could only have occurred during this wet climate period, which meant that the Sphinx itself, the leonine body, had to have been carved and exposed to the rain before the desert returned. It had to have been carved in 5000 BC, or 7000 BC, or, perhaps, as old as 10,000 BC. This changes everything. The Sphinx, suddenly, becomes the oldest monument on the planet. It means the Great Sphinx is not 4,500 years old. It is 7,000, 9,000, maybe 12,000 years old. It is thousands of years older than the pyramids. It is thousands of years older than the Egyptian civilization itself, which supposedly created it. It is an anachronism of stone. It is a relic, a survivor from a lost world, a monument left by an advanced civilization that, according to our model of history, had no right to exist at that time. This is the water erosion hypothesis, and it is the single, most powerful, and most disturbing piece of scientific evidence against the orthodox timeline. Of course, the establishment's reaction was immediate and fierce. The orthodox Egyptologists, led by the formidable and media-savvy Dr. Zahi Hawass, the self-proclaimed guardian of Giza, vehemently rejected the theory. They counter-argued, "No. It's not rain. It's salt exfoliation." They claim that moisture from the morning dew, rising through capillary action from the soil, pulls mineral salts to the surface of the stone. When the water evaporates, the salt crystals form and expand, flaking off the rock in layers, mimicking the pattern of water erosion. Shock, the geologist, just shakes his head with the patience of a scientist dealing with facts. "No," he insists. "Salt exfoliation is a bottom-up process. It attacks the base of a monument, where the ground moisture is most concentrated. The erosion in the Sphinx enclosure, however, is worse at the top of the walls. It is a top-down process. It is rain. The attempt to discredit the geological evidence with salt exfoliation is a desperate maneuver to protect the dogma. The battle lines were drawn between rock science and accepted history. And the heretical theory had a smoking gun. But if the Sphinx is such an ancient relic, if it is a 12,000-year-old message in a bottle, left at the end of the last ice age, what is the message? What, of such importance, is it guarding with its eternal vigilance? This is where the mystery descends from the surface and goes underground, into the realm of legend and geophysics. We must now talk about the Forbidden Chamber, the legendary Hall of Records. This idea, unlike the geology, does not come from science. It comes from a source the Academy despises, a mystic, a man named Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet of Kentucky. In the 1930s and 40s, Cayce, a simple man with no formal education, would enter a deep trance state. And in this trance, he would deliver readings, answering questions about health, the future, and, crucially, ancient history. And he spoke of a lost civilization. A civilization of high technology and advanced spirituality, called Atlantis. In 10,500 BC, Cayce claimed Atlantis was in its final death throes, about to be wiped out by a global cataclysm. The survivors, the sages, and guardians of knowledge, fled the impending destruction, and some of them, carrying the secrets of their civilization, came to Egypt, and they brought with them their knowledge, the sum total of the history, science, philosophy, technology, and genealogical records of their lost world, and they decided to hide it, not on a fragile scroll, but in a stone repository, to preserve it for a future generation, ours, that would be technologically advanced enough to find it and wise enough to use it. And they hid it, Cayce said, in a hall of records. And where, specifically, did he say this hall of records was? He said it was in Giza. It was in a secret chamber, buried deep in the bedrock, directly beneath the front paws of the Great Sphinx. This is, of course, the stuff of fantasy. It is occultism, not archaeology. It is the antithesis of the scientific method. Or is it? Cayce's legend, as fantastic as it was, attracted the attention of serious researchers. A team, led by geophysicist Thomas Dobecki, and sponsored by a group called the Shore Foundation, obtained an official permit. A strictly scientific permit, focused on geological anomalies. They were not mystics. They were geophysicists. They brought the arsenal of modern science, high-precision seismic equipment, ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and sensitive geophones. Their mission was simple and objective: scan the bedrock beneath the Sphinx. Look for any anomaly that might indicate an unnatural structure. The team set up their equipment. They laid their sensors in a precise grid. They began to ping the bedrock with low-frequency sound waves, listening for the echo that returned. And what they found was undeniable. They found clear seismic anomalies. The seismographs, the raw data, showed voids, gaps, cavities where solid rock should be. And these voids were not natural geological formations. They were not random fissures, nor caves created by groundwater. They were perfectly rectangular. They were symmetrical. They were, unmistakably, man-made. The team found a chamber, a large chamber, with estimated dimensions of about 7.6 meters by 12 meters, 25 by 40 feet, buried at a considerable depth in the bedrock. And its location? Directly under the front paws of the Sphinx. Exactly where Edgar Cayce said it would be. Science, unwittingly, had validated the legend. They found more. They found other anomalies, tunnel-like and passage-like, running from the back of the Sphinx and from the sides. The Giza Plateau, it seemed, was far from being a solid mass. It was hollow, a network of underground passages. The team was ecstatic. They were on the verge of the greatest discovery in human history, the proof of a lost civilization. They had the data. All they had to do was get the final permit to drill. Just one, small, discreet, 6 centimeter, 3-inch, hole, to drop a fiber optic camera and see what was inside. And then The forbidden part happened. The moment when politics and dogma crushed science. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the director of the Giza Plateau, the man with the power of a modern pharaoh, saw the data, and he immediately revoked the permit. He expelled the team. He declared the site closed to any future seismic investigation. The official story he presented? Hawass, in an international press conference, announced that he himself had investigated. He said, "There is nothing under the Sphinx. Only natural fissures." He claimed his own team had drilled and found only rock, but the shore team, the original scientists, counterattacked. "No. He didn't drill where we said. He drilled meters away from the anomaly. He deliberately missed, or was instructed to miss." A media and scientific blackout was imposed. For the next 20 years, under Hawass's watch, no one was allowed to bring seismic equipment near the Sphinx. The search for the truth was paralyzed. The door was slammed shut, sealed by fear of what might be found. Why? Why would the official guardian of Egypt, the man who should be safeguarding historical truth, not want to know? Why would he not want to be the man who found the legendary Hall of Records? Was he, as he claimed, simply protecting Egypt's heritage from a circus of lunatics and New Age mystics? Was he protecting the integrity of the site from a fantasy, or was he protecting something much bigger? Was he part of a containment? An institutional cover-up, designed to preserve the accepted historical chronology at all costs? Did he know what was in that chamber, or what the chamber's existence implied, and was terrified of the world finding out? The secret, the forbidden chamber, was real. Modern science had found it. And the authorities, in an act of historical censorship, had locked it away. But the story doesn't end with geophysics. The puzzle is only complete when we look to the sky. There is one more piece, the most poetic and unifying, of the heretical theory. We have the geology, shock. We have the mythology, Casey. We have the underground science, Dobecki's seismic anomalies. Now we need the astronomy. Enter Robert Bouvel, a Belgian engineer, fascinated by Egyptology and an amateur astronomer. He looked at the Giza Plateau, not as a cemetery for kings, but as a star map. He saw the three great pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure. And he noticed something that Egyptologists had dismissed as a mere construction imperfection. The two larger pyramids, Khufu and Khafre, are on an almost perfect diagonal line. But the third, the smaller one, Menkaure, is visibly offset to the east. It's not on the line. Why? Why this asymmetry? Why this imperfection in a project that is otherwise obsessed with precision? Bouvel, an astronomer, looked up. He looked at the constellation of Orion, which the Egyptians associated with the god Osiris, the god of resurrection. And he saw Orion's belt, the three stars of Orion's belt, Elnipik, Elnulm, and the third, the smaller star, Mintaka, is offset. It is slightly off the diagonal line of the other two. It was an almost perfect match. The Giza pyramids, Bouvel proposed, were an earthly representation of Orion's belt. The Hermetic principle, as above, so below. The Giza plateau was a mirror of the sky, a cosmic clock. But, like shock, Bouvel noticed that the match was not perfect for Khafre's time. The angle was slightly off for 2500 BC. Bouvel, a modern man, had a computer and planetarium software. He had the ability to rewind the sky. He could see the exact position of the stars in any year in the past. He began to rewind. He was looking for the one, singular, perfect date, when the alignment of the pyramids with Orion's belt would be exact, to the millimeter. He rewound the sky. 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000. He passed 2500 BC, where the alignment was just good, but he kept rewinding. Past the birth of Egyptian civilization. Past the Green Sahara. Back to the end of the last ice age, and then his computer found the point of maximum precision. He had found it. One date. In the year 10,500 BC. In that exact year, at the height of the precessional cycle, the Giza pyramids, on the ground, were a perfect, 1-to-1, millimeter precise match for the three stars of Orion's belt, as they hit their lowest point in the 26,000-year precessional cycle. It was the first time the Zeptepi, the mythical golden age that the Egyptians themselves, in their oldest texts, always spoke of. An era that academia had dismissed as mere mythological fantasy. But Bauval didn't stop there. He asked the final question, the one that would unite the sky and the Sphinx, in 10,500 BC on the day of the spring equinox. At dawn. What is on the eastern horizon? What is exactly due east? At the point where the sun rises, the computer calculated the position of the sun and the constellations, and the answer came with a resonance that echoed across 12 millennia. In 10,500 BC, at the spring equinox, the constellation that was rising on the eastern horizon was Leo, the lion. The Great Sphinx, a 73-meter-long, 240-foot lion, is sitting there, on the ground, carved from the bedrock, looking exactly due east, at the sunrise, and at itself, at its own celestial counterpart, the constellation of Leo, in the one, singular, perfect year. 10,500 BC. This is the grand unified theory. The convergence of all the evidence, the water erosion, shocks geology, the evidence of rain, points to a period before 5000 BC, possibly 10,000 BC. The Hall of Records, Casey's mythology, the legend of lost knowledge, points to 10,500 BC, and the Giza Orion clock, Bauval's astronomy, the proof of the stellar alignment, points to 10,500 BC. All three heretical paths, coming from completely different fields of study, lead to the exact same place, the same impossible date. The orthodox view, the dogma that Khafre built it in 2500 BC, is shattered by the convergence of scientific evidence. The Sphinx is not a statue. It is a clock. A doomsday clock, calibrated to mark cosmic time. A relic, a time marker, left by a high civilization that perished at the end of the last ice age. The lion is the when. It is the marking of the age of Leo, 10,500 BC, the moment of its creation, and the head. The recarved human head. That is the mark of the who. It is us. It is the civilization of the age of man, the age of Aquarius, the time, 12,000 years later, when the cosmic clock completes a cycle and the message must be rediscovered. The forbidden chamber. The Hall of Records is the what? It is the message. The warning. The knowledge of a civilization that was wiped out by the cataclysmic floods of the Ice Age thaw. A warning, left in stone, about the cycles of planetary destruction and renewal. A warning to us, who live in a world that refuses to learn from the past. This is the great secret of the Sphinx. The riddle is not about a man, nor a pharaoh. The riddle is about time, cyclical history, and the fragility of our own civilization. Zahi Hawass, the Egyptian authorities, the academic establishment. They are not hiding a chamber out of malice. They are defending a worldview. A worldview that places Egyptian civilization as the cradle of history. To admit that the chamber is real, that the geology and astronomy are right, is to admit that Shock, and West, and Bauval are right. And to admit this is to admit that the glorious 3,000-year Egyptian civilization did not invent its knowledge, it inherited it. It is to admit that Egyptian history, and by extension, our history, the history of human civilization, is a 12,000-year lie. And so, the Sphinx sits in the sand. Its body, worn by the rain of a lost age, is 12,000 years old. Its head, a vain portrait, is 4,500 years old. Its gaze, fixed on the eastern horizon, is waiting, and under its paws, sealed, not by rock, but by the weight of politics, dogma, and academic denial, a chamber whose existence was proven by modern science, remains forbidden. The straight line of history is broken, and the Sphinx is the guardian of the fracture, the silent witness to a time we refuse to remember. The Sphinx, therefore, is not just a monument. It is a petrified paradox. It is the physical proof that our straight line of history is, in fact, a vicious cycle of forgetting and rediscovery. What makes it so disturbing to academia is not its age, but the implication of its age. If the Sphinx is from 10,500 BC, it means that, at the height of the last ice age, when the rest of the world was struggling for survival in caves, a civilization in Giza possessed the ability to 1. Carve a 73-meter monolith from the bedrock with monumental precision. 2. Possess geological and engineering knowledge to choose the exact location. And 3. Possess astronomical knowledge sophisticated enough to map the precession of the equinoxes and align the monument with the constellation of Leo in the exact year of 10,500 BC. This is not the work of hunter-gatherers. This is the work of a high culture. What happened to this culture? The answer lies in the Sphinx itself. The water erosion that aged it is the same that bore witness to the cataclysm. The massive melting of the ice caps at the end of the Pleistocene, between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, was not a gentle event. It was a series of global floods, tsunamis, and violent climate shifts that rewrote the planet's geography. The Sphinx, with its body worn by the rain of an era that drowned, is the fossil record of that event. It is the witness that the myth of Atlantis, the myth of a global flood that wiped out an advanced civilization, is not a fantasy, but a historical memory encoded in stone. The tension between orthodoxy and heresy intensifies in the figure of Zahi Hawass. He is not just a bureaucrat. He is the high priest of dogma. His motivation, beyond politics, is the protection of national identity. The official Egyptian story is the story of a people who rose from nothing and built the greatest empire in the world. If the knowledge came from a previous civilization, if the dynastic Egyptians just inherited the monuments and recarved the head, it diminishes the glory of the fourth dynasty. It transforms Khufu and Khafre from creators into mere restorers. It is a narcissistic wound to the nation's soul. The shutdown scene of the seismic investigation is the dramatic turning point. Dobecki's team, with their geophones and cables, working under the scorching sun, the palpable excitement with every ping that returned, the confirmation of the voids, the euphoria. And then, the arrival of Hawass, not as a colleague, but as an enforcer. The revocation of the permit was not an administrative act. It was an act of faith in orthodoxy. The silence imposed was not a scientific silence. It was a political silence. The chamber under the Sphinx's paws is not just an empty space. It is the ground zero of a new human history. That is why it must remain forbidden. What is inside? Casey's legend speaks of crystal tablets, of engraved texts, of artifacts that hold the key to Atlantean history and science. But what modern science suggests is even more fascinating. If the chamber was sealed in 10,500 BC, it could contain atmospheric samples and sediments from that period, preserved in a time vacuum. It could contain the physical proof of the catastrophe that ended the Ice Age. The Hall of Records might not be a library of scrolls, but a geological and biological time capsule. A snapshot of a world that vanished. The Sphinx, with its small head and giant body, is the perfect metaphor for our civilization. We have a small head, a limited and arrogant view of our own past, based on only 4,500 years of recorded history. But we have a vast body, a deep and forgotten past of 12,000 years, stretching back into an age of giants and lost knowledge. We live in the disproportion between what we think we are and what we truly are. The Sphinx's gaze, fixed on the eastern horizon, is not an empty stare. It is a gaze of warning. It is looking at the exact point where the sun rises on the spring equinox, the moment of renewal and a new cycle. It is looking at the constellation of Leo, which marks the beginning of an era. But it is also looking to the future, to the moment when the precession of the equinoxes will bring the sky back to its original alignment. The moment when humanity, perhaps, will be ready to hear the message. The Sphinx is the last secret on Earth. It forces us to confront the possibility that history is not an arrow, but a spiral. That progress is not linear, but cyclical. That our bright, technological present is just an echo, a repetition, of a past we refuse to acknowledge. The true riddle is not what is under the Sphinx, but what is within us that stops us from digging. It is the fear that, in unearthing the past, we will also unearth the proof that our future is condemned to repeat the cycle of cataclysm and forgetting. The Sphinx is the sentinel of truth. And the truth, in this case, is that we are not the first, nor the wisest. We are just the amnesiac heirs of a legacy that lies, forbidden, under the sand. And while the world debates the construction date, the stone body continues to scream its age, and the sealed chamber continues to keep the silence of 12,000 years. Time is running out. The cosmic clock is ticking, and the Sphinx, the Lion of Giza, waits patiently for the day when humanity will finally have the courage to break the dogma and read the message it guards. History is not closed. It is just waiting to be rewritten. The sound of the geophysicist's hammer, the echo of the ping in the bedrock, is the sound of the future colliding with the past. And Hawas's silence is the sound of fear. The body of the Sphinx, with its rain marks, is a geological palimpsest, a surface where history has been written and rewritten. The fourth dynasty tried to erase the previous history, recarving the head, but nature, with its relentless force, preserved the truth in the enclosure walls. The vertical erosion, deep and unmistakable, is the signature of the Ice Age, a stamp that no modern authority can erase. It is proof that the Sphinx was not built for the fourth dynasty, but found by it. The figure of John Anthony West, the symbolist, and Robert Schoch, the orthodox geologist, is the union of intuition and science. West saw the problem with the eyes of intuition, the disproportion, the anomaly. Schoch provided the irrefutable proof with the coldness of geology. This unlikely collaboration is the very essence of the heresy, the legend that meets science, the intuition that is proven to be fact. The establishment tried to discredit West as a mystic, but they could not discredit Schoch, the Yale-educated professor. The only way to silence the truth was to silence the site. The Valley Temple of Khafre, which connects to the Sphinx, also bears the mark of anomaly. Its casing blocks are made of granite, but the core is massive limestone. And what is stranger, the limestone blocks of the core show the same type of water erosion as the Sphinx enclosure. This suggests that Khafre did not build the Valley Temple from scratch, but that he rebuilt or recased a much older structure, one that was already worn down by rain. The pharaoh was not a builder, but a restorer of ruins. The Sphinx and its temple are, in fact, the remains of a pre-Egyptian complex, a testament to a civilization that existed before time. The precision of Bauvel's alignment in 10,500 BC is the coup de grace to the orthodox chronology. The precession of the equinoxes is a slow cycle, taking 26,000 years to complete. For the builders of the Sphinx to have aligned it with the constellation of Leo on the spring equinox of 10,500 BC, they needed a knowledge of astronomy and a record of celestial observations that spanned millennia. They were not just looking at the sky. They were calculating the future and the past to the sky. This implies an advanced science, a computational ability, and a long-term vision that does not fit the image of a Neolithic culture. The civilization of the Zeptepi, the first time, was conscious of cosmic time. They understood precession, the great 26,000-year cycle, and knew that history moves in ages. The Sphinx is their monument of transition, marking the end of the age of Leo and the beginning of the age of Cancer. The knowledge they hid is not just about their history, but about the cyclical nature of catastrophe. They were planting a seed of knowledge for the future. What the Hall of Records might reveal is the science of civilization preservation. They may have mastered climate engineering, seismic geology, and long-term astronomy. The contents of the chamber might include star maps and diagrams of machines that used the planet's energy. Hawas's fear is of revealing our own insignificance and the fragility of our current knowledge. The Sphinx is the key to humanity's lost memory. It reminds us that our civilization is not the apex, but an intermediate point in a much larger cycle. The silence that surrounds it is the silence of history that refuses to speak. But the stone speaks, through erosion, proportion, and stellar alignment. It tells us that the truth is there, waiting. The day the chamber is opened, the day the Sphinx can finally deliver its message, will be the true Zeptepi. The true nature of the Hall of Records transcends the idea of a mere library. The civilization of the Zeptepi encoded their knowledge in a medium that could withstand 12,000 years of cataclysms. The Hall is a monolithic computer, a survival manual for the next age. The fear of the establishment is not just of losing control of the historical narrative, but the fear of the implosion of knowledge. If the Sphinx is from 10,500 BC, the entire chronology of civilization collapses. It would force a radical re-evaluation of every ancient civilization on the planet. The fear is that, by opening the chamber, they will find not just the past, but the future, and that this future is a warning that we are on the path to repeating the mistake of the previous civilization. The Sphinx is the inflection point of our history. It confronts us with the responsibility of being the heirs to a knowledge that could change the world. The leonine body, worn by rain, is the memory of the earth. The human head, recarved, is the arrogance of man. The conflict between the body and the head is the conflict between deep truth and shallow narrative. And as the Sphinx waits, it reminds us that truth cannot be buried forever. The silence imposed by chaos is the last line of defense of a dying paradigm. It is the desperate attempt to keep the arrow of history straight, ignoring the spiral. But the Sphinx, with its patience of stone, knows that time is on its side. With every new advance in geophysics, with every new look at the sky, the truth becomes clearer. The riddle is not what the Sphinx is hiding, but why we are so determined not to look. The Sphinx is the silent witness of the Zeptepi, the first time. It is the proof that our civilization is not the beginning, but a rebirth. The knowledge it guards is the key to ensuring this rebirth does not end in another cataclysm. The Sphinx is our cosmic mirror, reflecting our capacity for greatness and our propensity for forgetfulness. It challenges us to be worthy of the message it guards. The chamber, when opened, will reveal the true past and impel a conscious evolution.